Mass protests have erupted across Israel as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu refuses to end the war on Gaza, despite mounting domestic and international pressure to agree on a ceasefire. Israeli protesters again held an anti-government demonstration in Tel Aviv, demanding Netanyahu reach an agreement that would secure the release of captives held in Gaza. Several protesters were detained by police. Well, for more on this, we're joined now by Gershon Baskin, who is a former Israeli negotiator who was involved in talks with Hamas. He joins us from West Jerusalem. Thanks very much for being with us here on Al Jazeera. First of all, as we've seen, protests continue against Netanyahu. What have you made of the growing anger there? I mean, we've obviously seen them before since the beginning of this war, but could this potentially be a turning point?
Hopefully this will be a turning point, and was obviously sprung off by the execution of the 6 Israeli hostages who everyone believed would come home alive. Several of those hostages who were killed over the weekend have been symbols of the hostages. Their pictures are all over the country. And there is growing awareness amongst the Israeli public that it is Netanyahu that's preventing an agreement. His latest is the made-up strategic importance of the so-called Philadelphi Corridor, the border between Gaza and Egypt, which one of the Israeli military correspondents last night revealed that the Israeli army has not found one single smuggling tunnel that goes underneath the Philadelphi Corridor. So this is obviously a ploy made up by Netanyahu in order to prevent agreement with Hamas.
So apart from the Philadelphia Corridor, which we know is a major sticking point, what else is actually hampering ceasefire efforts right now?
But the bottom line is that Hamas is demanding an agreement that includes the end of the war, a commitment to end the war, and Israel is refusing to make a commitment to end the war. Before getting into all the details of Palestinian prisoners and numbers and vetoes and names or other conditions on the withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, the bottom line is whether or not an agreement will lead to the end of the war. Now, part of the problem that we're facing is that the agreement that's been negotiated for 3 months now is a bad agreement. And it doesn't really create the motivation to reach an agreement when you're talking about 42 days, during which time 32 Israeli hostages would be released, and no one knows what happens on day 43. It's a bad agreement. I've talked to numbers of military personnel in Israel who have all agreed that this war could end in 3 weeks. And it would take Israel 3 weeks, a maximum of 3 weeks, to withdraw completely from Gaza, to redeploy along the border. And Hamas has told me in private conversations that they would be willing, if the war ends in 3 weeks, to release all the Israeli hostages, all 101 of them. Of course, they're demanding that Israel release a significant number of Palestinian prisoners. But this is a deal that can be made. And since we're talking from Doha, I would emphasize to the Qatari government and to the Hamas leadership sitting in Doha that if they would make their agreement to the 3-week deal public and not just private with me, it would create an enormous amount of pressure on the Israeli public.
OK. At the same time, we've seen the US Justice Department announce criminal charges against Hamas's leadership. What do you make of that happening in the middle of these negotiations, and how does that complicate things?
I don't think it complicates things. I don't think Yahya Sinwar is going to be boarding a plane to New York at any time in the near future, or any of the other Hamas leaders. It's really just a statement of public publicity, public diplomacy. It doesn't have really any impact on the talks that are going now. We know that the International Criminal Court is probably going to issue warrants for arrest for Hamas leaders as well as Israeli leaders. And that's a different ballgame than some US Justice Department spokesperson saying they're putting out claims against Yahya Sinwar or other people.
And just finally, how is all of this actually being viewed inside Israel? Obviously, Al Jazeera has been banned from reporting there. So can you just give us an idea of what the vast majority of people actually want right now?
It seems from the polls that the majority of Israelis want a deal. They want the hostages home. That's the first and most important concern. But the society is very divided, and Netanyahu and his people have managed to politicize the issue of the hostages. So there are those who believe that if we bring the hostages home and make a deal with Hamas, we're just inviting another October 7th. And there's a great deal of fear. I try to remind people that if Israel had actually protected its border on October 7th, if there had been 15 tanks and 3 helicopters in the air, October 7th 7th wouldn't have happened. But it's been inflated so much that you would think that Israel was facing the Russian army on the other side of the Gaza border. And people are afraid, and that fear creates an unwillingness to think about a possible deal with Hamas. But it seems that there is a majority of Israelis who want a deal now, who want this war to end, who want the hostages to come home.
OK, we'll leave it there. But thank you so much for your insight. That's Gershon Baskin, former Israeli negotiator, with us there from West Jerusalem.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.